A man can spend $3 million building a mansion and still forget to ask who owns the ground beneath his feet. That was the first thought Emily Harper had when Grant Whitmore looked up at the cracked brick face of her apartment building and laughed, as if the whole thing had been staged for his entertainment. It was raining in Brookline, the kind of thin October rain that made the sidewalk shine like old silver and turned every passing car into a smear of headlights and wet tires. Emily stood at the bottom of the narrow front steps with a paper grocery bag balanced against her hip, her beige sweater darkened at the shoulders, her hair tucked loosely beneath the hood of a navy raincoat she had owned for almost 10 years. The building behind her was 4 stories of faded red brick, black fire escapes, and windows that rattled whenever the wind came down from the Charles River. It was old, honest, tired in the way places became tired after holding too many lives without complaint. Grant's black Range Rover waited at the curb like a polished accusation. Beside him, Madison Blake sat in the passenger seat, one manicured hand resting near her throat, her blonde hair arranged in soft waves that looked immune to weather, traffic, and ordinary human inconvenience. Grant had not changed much since the divorce, not in the ways people could see from across a sidewalk. His suit was still perfectly tailored. His watch still flashed when he moved his wrist. His smile still arrived before his kindness ever did, which was to say his kindness rarely arrived at all. "Emily," he said, dragging her name out with that familiar tone of amused pity. "I almost didn't recognize you." She shifted the grocery bag higher against her side. A loaf of bread pressed awkwardly into her ribs. "Grant." Madison leaned forward enough for Emily to see the careful curve of her smile. "This is where you live." Grant glanced up again at the stained stone lintels, the dim lobby light, the buzzer panel with 3 missing nameplates. "After all these years, Em, you're still here?" He gave a soft laugh, not loud enough to be called cruel by a stranger, only polished enough to pass for conversation. That had always been his talent. He could humiliate a woman in public and make it sound like concern. "I thought you would have found something better by now." "Better." The word slid under her skin with the cold precision of a key entering an old lock. She remembered hearing it in court when his attorney described her settlement as more than fair. She remembered hearing it at dinner parties when Grant said she would feel better if she stopped being so sentimental about small things. She remembered hearing it the night he told her Madison understood the life he was building in a way Emily never had. Better neighborhood, better wife, better future, better story. Emily looked past him toward the hill beyond the town center, where Whitmore Ridge rose behind iron gates and private roads, where Grant's new glass and limestone mansion sat above 12 landscaped acres like a monument to his own opinion of himself. She had seen photographs of it in Boston Home, in charity newsletters, on Madison's social feed, always glowing at sunset, always captioned with words like blessed, built, earned. Grant followed her gaze and smiled wider. "Madison and I are hosting investors next weekend. The final phase of the Ridgeview project is almost approved. You should see the place now. The East Terrace alone is larger than this entire building." Madison gave a light laugh, the kind trained not to wrinkle the face. "Grant, don't be rude." But she did not sound as though she wanted him to stop. Emily's fingers tightened around the damp paper handles of the bag. For one brief second, something inside her wanted to answer, to tell him that marble floors did not make a man taller, that 12 acres could not buy a conscience, that a person who needed witnesses for every victory was never as secure as he pretended to be. Instead, she said nothing. Silence had become one of the few luxuries Grant had never learned how to steal from her. "You always were stubborn," he said, mistaking her restraint for defeat because that was easier for him. "Well, take care of yourself. These old places can fall apart quickly if nobody invests in them." He stepped back toward the Range Rover, opened the driver's door, and paused as if expecting her to ask about his life, his mansion, his success, his version of the world. Emily only climbed the first step. The lobby smelled faintly of rainwater, dust, and the lemon cleaner Mrs. Alvarez from 2B used every Sunday whether the landlord paid her or not. Grant drove away before she reached the mailboxes, the Range Rover's tires hissing over the wet street. Only then did Emily let her shoulders drop. Her hands were trembling, not from weakness, not anymore, but from the old shock of being seen through someone else's contempt and having to remind herself it was not a mirror. She unlocked mailbox 3C and found the usual stack of grocery flyers, a utility notice, and one cream-colored envelope with the return address printed in dark blue ink. Price, Alden and Rowe, Attorneys at Law, Boston, Massachusetts. Her breath caught. The paper was thick, formal, dry beneath her fingertips despite the damp air around her. She knew what it was before she opened it. She had been waiting 8 months for this envelope, 8 months of county records, probate files, survey maps, title searches, and quiet phone calls with Eleanor Price, the only attorney who had ever spoken to her, as if she were not a footnote in Grant Whitmore's life. Emily slid one finger beneath the flap and unfolded the letter. The words were simple. Final land ownership verification completed. Parcel WR 17, Whitmore Ridge, confirmed under Harper Family Trust succession. Full report attached. For a moment, the lobby seemed to go completely still. The pipes stopped groaning. The rain softened against the glass door. Even the city beyond the walls felt as if it had leaned in to listen. Grant thought her old apartment was proof that she had been left behind. But Emily knew now that the most valuable thing she owned was not inside this building at all. It was beneath his mansion. Emily did not go upstairs right away. She stood in the narrow lobby with the grocery bag softening in her arms and the letter trembling between her fingers, reading the same sentence until the words stopped looking like English and started looking like a door she had been afraid to open. Parcel WR 17. Harper Family Trust succession. Full report attached. 8 months earlier, those phrases would have meant nothing to her. 8 years earlier, she would have handed the envelope to Grant and trusted him to explain it, because that was what marriage had become by then, a quiet exchange where she surrendered questions and he returned decisions. It embarrassed her now, how completely she had once mistaken confidence for competence, how easily a man in a fitted suit could make uncertainty sound like love. The elevator was broken again, so she carried the groceries up 3 flights, each step creaking beneath her like the building was remembering every tired woman who had climbed it before her. Inside apartment 3C, the heat clanked through the radiators with uneven loyalty. The rooms were small, but they held their ground. A yellow lamp glowed beside a second-hand sofa. A chipped blue bowl sat on the kitchen counter. On the wall above her desk hung a faded photograph of her grandmother, Margaret Harper, standing in front of a farmhouse that had been gone longer than Emily had been alive. Margaret had never looked wealthy in that picture. She wore jeans, work boots, and a cotton blouse with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. But her eyes had the calm certainty of a woman who knew exactly where the property line ended and where nonsense began. Emily set the groceries down and opened the attached report. The first page was a survey map of Whitmore Ridge, dated 1979, its lines drawn in black ink, its measurements noted in feet and acres. Beneath it were copies of tax records, probate filings, easement notes, and old transfers that had spent decades sleeping in county archives while newer men built newer dreams on top of them. She traced one boundary with her fingertip. 12.4 acres. Eastern Slope Access Road. Subsurface and ground rights retained by Harper Family Land Trust. Her breath grew shallow. This was not a clerical mistake. It was a buried inheritance, the kind families forgot when grief, debt, and distance scattered them across different towns. Her grandmother had spoken of land only once, on a summer afternoon when Emily was 16 and complaining about their peeling porch. Never be ashamed of old things, Margaret had said, shelling peas into a metal bowl. Old things are the only ones that remember who paid for them. At the time, Emily had rolled her eyes with the lazy arrogance of a teenager who thought history was just something adults used to ruin afternoons. Now the memory returned with the force of a bell. Grant had built his empire on clean lines, glass walls, and the promise that nothing old mattered unless it could be renovated and sold. He had loved saying he made his own luck. Emily knew better. In the early years, before Madison, before the magazine spreads, before Grant learned to speak to her like she was furniture he had outgrown, she had sat beside him at their kitchen table highlighting zoning documents while he paced with his phone pressed to his ear. She had organized his receipts, caught errors in contracts, soothed angry lenders, and once used $22,000 from her own savings to keep his first Ridgeview closing from collapsing. He had called it temporary. Later, during the divorce, temporary became impossible to prove. His attorneys made her sound sentimental, confused, financially naive. Grant sat across the conference table in a charcoal suit, looking wounded by the inconvenience of her memory. Emily never understood the business, he had said gently, as if kindness required him to erase her. She had walked out with her grandmother's apartment, a modest settlement, and the shame everyone else seemed eager to assign her. Now, sitting at that same small desk, she read the final paragraph of Eleanor Price's letter twice. The mansion structure may be privately held by Whitmore Development Holdings, but the underlying land rights remain legally vested in the Harper Family Land Trust, with Emily Harper listed as sole successor trustee. Outside, the rain tapped against the window like impatient fingers. Emily looked toward the dark outline of the ridge beyond town. Grant had not simply built a mansion above her inheritance. He had used the land beneath it as part of the collateral package for the largest project of his career. The next morning, Emily sat across from Eleanor Price in a corner office on Federal Street, 22 floors above downtown Boston, watching sunlight move across a table covered in maps that looked too old to have any power and too precise to ignore. Eleanor was in her early 60s, with silver hair cut neatly at her jaw and the composed patience of someone who had watched rich men underestimate paper for 40 years. She did not raise her voice. She did not decorate bad news. She simply turned one document after another until Grant Whitmore's mansion, his terrace, his pool, his imported stone driveway, and the private road that curved through the map all began to look less like achievements and more like objects placed carelessly on someone else's table. The structure belongs to Whitmore Development Holdings, Eleanor said, tapping the newer deed with a blue pen. The land beneath it does not. The original developer acquired building rights through a limited use agreement in the 1980s, but the underlying ground rights were never transferred. They remained with the Harper Family Land Trust. Emily looked at the map, at the thin black line surrounding parcel WR-17. And Grant never knew. Eleanor's expression did not change, but one eyebrow lifted by the smallest possible degree. Grant likely knew what his closing attorney summarized for him. That is not the same as knowing what he owned. It was such a lawyerly sentence, polite enough for court and sharp enough to cut glass. Emily almost smiled. Outside the window, Boston moved with its usual efficient indifference. Buses easing through traffic, office workers crossing streets with coffee cups, and private emergencies. Down there, life continued. Up here, the past had quietly become enforceable. Eleanor slid another page forward. There is more. 3 months ago, Whitmore Development listed the Ridgeview expansion financing with several secured assets. Parcel WR-17 appears in the collateral schedule. Emily felt the air leave her lungs. But he cannot pledge land he does not own. Correct. Eleanor folded her hands. Which means either the bank relied on incomplete information or someone made an assumption that should never have been made. Emily looked away, not because she was surprised, but because the pattern was so familiar it almost felt intimate. Grant had always treated the world as if details existed to serve him. Reservations appeared. Bills were handled. People adjusted. Women forgave. Paperwork bent, or so he believed, beneath the weight of his certainty. For years, Emily had been one of those details, a quiet figure in the background smoothing the edges of his ambition. Now the smallest overlooked line in an old land agreement had become the thing standing between him and the future he had already bragged about. What happens now? She asked. Eleanor removed her glasses and set them on the table. Legally, you have options. You can demand a formal lease. You can negotiate a sale. You can challenge the financing documents. You can request immediate correction of the public record before his investors proceed. Emily listened, but each option felt too large, too cold, too easy to mistake for revenge. She thought of Grant in front of her apartment, laughing at the brick walls that had sheltered her when everyone else stepped back. She thought of Madison's smile, soft and expensive and empty of mercy. She thought of herself in the divorce conference room, trying to explain the money she had given, the contracts she had reviewed, the years she had poured into a life Grant later described as if she had merely occupied it. I do not want to destroy him, Emily said quietly. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. That may make you kinder than he was. No, Emily replied, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. It makes me careful. Eleanor nodded once, as if that answer pleased her more than anger would have. Then we proceed carefully. By Friday afternoon, the first formal notice was sent to Whitmore Development Holdings, the bank, and the county registry. It did not accuse. It did not threaten. It requested verification, correction, and disclosure, 3 clean words that sounded harmless until placed in the right order. Emily expected silence. Instead, at 6:17 that evening, her phone lit up with Grant's name for the first time in nearly 2 years. She let it ring. A voicemail followed. Then another. Then a text message that read, "We need to talk." She stared at the words while rain gathered again against her kitchen window. For years, Grant had decided when conversations began and ended. This time, Emily turned the phone face down, made tea in her chipped blue mug, and opened the old Harper Trust folder on her desk. The mansion on the ridge was still glowing in the distance, its windows lit like a crown. But for the first time, Emily understood that crowns, like houses, were only impressive when the ground beneath them agreed to stay still. By Monday morning, Grant Whitmore's voice had changed. The first voicemail had been clipped and annoyed, the tone of a man inconvenienced by paperwork. The second was smoother, wrapped in charm so familiar Emily could almost see him leaning against a conference table, one hand in his pocket, performing reasonableness for an invisible audience. By the third, the charm had thinned. "Emily, this is getting unnecessary," he said, as if the word unnecessary could soften a legal notice sent to his bank. "Whatever your attorney thinks she found, we can handle it privately." Privately. That was how Grant preferred everything that made him look less brilliant. Private apologies. Private corrections. Private arrangements that left the public version of him untouched and gleaming. Emily listened once, then deleted the message. She spent the morning at her desk in apartment 3C, surrounded by copies of maps, trust documents, and old tax receipts that smelled faintly of dust and cardboard. The radiator hissed. Downstairs, a delivery truck backed up with 3 sharp beeps. Life in the old building continued with stubborn dignity, unaware that a mansion on the ridge had begun to tremble on paper. At noon, Eleanor called. His attorney responded. Emily held the phone closer. Already, fear moves faster than courtesy. There was a dry pause on the line. They deny any defect in ownership, but they are requesting a meeting. That combination usually means they found the defect and dislike it. Emily looked at the photograph of Margaret Harper above her desk. Her grandmother's boots were planted in the dirt as if the earth had personally agreed to hold her. "What did you tell them?" "That all communication goes through my office." "Good. There is something else," Eleanor said. "Whitmore Development has a presentation this Saturday at the mansion. Investors, lenders, local officials, a few press contacts. It appears to be for the Ridgeview expansion." Emily closed her eyes. She could picture it too clearly. Candles floating in glass bowls, caterers in black uniforms, Madison smiling beside arrangements of white orchids, Grant lifting a glass beneath the high ceilings he believed proved something permanent. He is still hosting it. At the moment, yes. My guess is he thinks confidence will keep everyone calm. Emily almost laughed, but it came out as a breath. Grant had always believed performance could outrun reality. When their marriage had started cracking, he bought her a bracelet and kissed her cheek in front of friends. When his first project nearly failed, he held a launch party before the permits were complete. When Madison became impossible to explain, he called Emily insecure until the truth grew tired of waiting. "There is a formal path," Eleanor continued. "We can file before Saturday and force disclosure immediately." Emily looked at the letter lying open on the desk. "Then we do it properly. No accusations. No theatrics. We bring certified copies, registry confirmation, and a representative from the title office if they agree to attend. You say very little. Let the documents speak." That suited Emily. Her anger had changed shape over the years. Once, it had been hot and embarrassing, a thing that rose into her throat and made her feel young. Now it was quieter, heavier, more useful. It helped her choose a dress without shaking. It helped her call Claire Bennett, the one friend who had not vanished after the divorce, and ask if she would come with her on Saturday. Claire did not ask for details. She only said, "Tell me what time, and I will wear shoes I can stand in." That evening, Emily walked to the small grocery store 2 blocks away. The rain had cleared, leaving the sidewalks bright beneath the streetlights. As she passed the front of her building, she looked up at the cracked brick, the rattling windows, the fire escape zigzagging like black stitching against the wall. For years, she had thought of this place as what she had been left with. Now she saw it differently. It was not the remnant of a smaller life. It was the place that had kept her steady long enough to remember what belonged to her. On Saturday, Grant would fill his mansion with people who believed wealth was always visible. Emily would arrive with an old map in a leather folder and prove that the most powerful things were often the ones nobody bothered to look beneath. Saturday arrived with a sky so clear it looked almost staged, the kind of bright New England afternoon that made wealth appear cleaner than it had any right to be. Emily stood in front of her closet just after 3 o'clock, studying the few dresses she owned as if one of them might explain how a woman was supposed to walk back into the world that had once applauded her erasure. She chose a simple navy dress with long sleeves and a narrow waist, the same color as deep water, the same color Grant used to say made her look too serious. She pinned her hair low, slipped on plain pearl earrings from her grandmother, and placed the leather folder from Eleanor Price on the kitchen table. Inside were certified copies, registry confirmations, a survey map, and the letter that had turned Grant's pride into a legal question. Claire Bennett arrived at 4:15 wearing a charcoal coat, low heels, and the expression of a woman prepared to smile politely at people she would rather never meet. Claire had been Emily's friend since college, before Grant, before Madison, before every social invitation became a loyalty test that Emily somehow failed by being abandoned. She looked Emily over once and nodded. "You look calm." Emily picked up the folder. "That is because my panic is well organized." Claire's mouth curved. Margaret would approve. The drive to Whitmore Ridge took 28 minutes. They passed coffee shops, townhouses, stone churches, and the old cemetery where maples burned red and gold behind wrought iron fencing. The higher the road climbed, the quieter the neighborhood became, as if money itself had paid extra to reduce the volume of ordinary life. At the gate, a young attendant checked Emily's name on a tablet and hesitated for just half a second, long enough to reveal that Grant had not expected her to actually come. The mansion appeared at the end of a curving drive lined with boxwoods and small lights hidden in the grass. Tightening around his eyes told Emily the legal notice had cost him sleep. Then the mask returned. "Emily," he said warmly, too warmly, as several guests turned to look. "I am glad you made it." Should become something greater than what history left behind. Removed a certified survey map, its old paper protected in a clear sleeve. Thomas Reed placed his registry folder beside it, his phone, and stepped toward the hallway. Another leaned toward his wife and whispered something that made her eyebrows rise. Madison moved away from Grant by half a step, which in that room felt like a formal announcement. Grant looked at Emily then, really looked at her, not at her dress, not at her old apartment, not at the version of her he had preserved because it made his choices easier to admire. For the first time in years, he seemed to see the woman standing in front of him as someone with records, memory, patience, and legal standing. "You should have come to me first," he said. Emily almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly Grant to believe the truth owed him advance notice. "I did come to you first," she said. "For years. You just never listened when I spoke without an attorney." The words landed more gently than anger would have, and perhaps that was why they hurt him more. Claire stood behind Emily, silent and solid. Eleanor closed the clear sleeve over the map. The orchids on the table looked suddenly absurd, expensive flowers arranged above a fact no amount of money could perfume. Grant's mansion still gleamed. The windows still caught the late afternoon light. The view was still breathtaking. But every person in that foyer now understood the difference between looking like you owned something and actually owning what mattered. Grant asked everyone to continue enjoying the evening, but the sentence sounded almost ceremonial, like a captain politely requesting calm after the ship had already noticed the water. The musicians near the dining room began playing again, softer than before, and the servers resumed their careful movement through the foyer, though even the clink of glasses seemed cautious now. No one truly returned to the party. They rearranged themselves into small clusters of whispered calculation, each guest suddenly remembering an urgent text message, a child at home, an early meeting, a reason not to be photographed too close to uncertainty. Emily stood near the side table while Eleanor gathered the copies, her fingers steady, her expression unreadable. Claire leaned close and murmured, "That was cleaner than I expected." Emily kept her eyes on Grant. Clean does not mean painless. Across the room, Madison was speaking to him in a low voice, her hand moving in sharp little gestures toward the terrace, the guests, the banker, the map. Grant answered without looking at her. His attention remained fixed on Eleanor's briefcase, as if he believed the documents might vanish if he stared hard enough. A few minutes later, the silver-haired banker approached Emily with a careful smile. "Ms. Harper," he said, extending his hand. "Daniel Royce, Commonwealth Atlantic Bank. I believe our legal department will be reaching out to your counsel." Emily shook his hand. His palm was cool and dry. "Please speak with Miss Price." Naturally. His gaze flicked toward the windows, then back to her. "This is a significant clarification." Significant. In rooms like this, people used small words to avoid admitting large problems. Grant crossed the foyer before the banker could say more. Up close, Emily could see the strain at the corners of his mouth, the faint shadow beneath his eyes, the careful effort he was spending not to appear cornered in his own home. "Daniel," Grant said, placing himself between them with a smile that did not reach his face. "We will have this resolved quickly." The banker nodded with professional neutrality, which was somehow more frightening than disapproval. "I look forward to receiving the updated title package." He excused himself, and Grant watched him go as if a door had closed somewhere inside his chest. Then he turned to Emily. "Library." "Now." Claire stepped forward. "That is not how you ask." Grant's eyes moved to her, irritated by the existence of witnesses he could not dismiss. Emily touched Claire's sleeve. "It is fine." Eleanor looked at Emily over the rim of her glasses. "I will be nearby." The library was at the back of the mansion, a handsome room with dark shelves, leather chairs, and a fireplace that looked unused because real fire would have been too unpredictable for Grant's taste. Framed architectural drawings lined the walls. A scale model of the Ridgeview expansion sat beneath glass on a central table. Tiny roads, tiny trees, tiny homes waiting to become very large lawns. Grant closed the door, then immediately seemed to regret the privacy, because privacy had always been his stage until he lost control of the script. "What do you want?" he asked. Emily looked around the room. "You used to ask me that when you already knew the answer." His jaw tightened. "Do not turn this into theater. I did not invite people here. You brought a county official into my home. Onto my land," she said quietly, gave a short, stunned laugh. "You cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious in my life." Grant stared at her, as if she had spoken in a language designed specifically to offend him. The fireless hearth behind him reflected the room's quiet luxury, the built-in shelves, the leather chairs, the miniature development beneath glass, all the objects he had gathered to prove that he had risen above ordinary limits. Yet the woman standing before him in a navy dress and plain pearls had just placed limits back around him with a single sheet of paper. "A housing fund," he repeated, his voice low with disbelief. "You came into my home, embarrassed me in front of my investors, and now you want me to fund your charity project?" Emily did not move. "You embarrassed yourself when you pledged land you did not own." His eyes flashed toward the door, as if he could feel the guests on the other side listening through polished wood and expensive manners. "This is extortion." "No," Emily said. "This is negotiation. Extortion would require me to threaten something I have no right to do. I have every right to protect the trust, correct the collateral record, and require compensation for the use of the land." He looked down at the document again. The legal language seemed to irritate him more than anger would have, probably because anger could be dismissed as emotion, and paper had the rude habit of remaining paper no matter how important a man believed himself to be. "You do realize what this could do," he said. "The bank could pause the financing. The investors could delay commitments. The city review could become complicated. Then you should want a clean solution." "I want a reasonable solution." "So do I." Grant gave a humorless smile. "Reasonable would be selling me the land at a fair price and letting everyone move on." Emily thought about the phrase "move on," how often people used it when they really meant "stop remembering what I did." After the divorce, friends had suggested she move on. Grant's mother had told her that bitterness aged a woman. His attorney had advised her to accept the settlement and rebuild quietly. Everyone loved healing when it required the wounded person to become convenient. "I am not selling," Emily said. Grant's face tightened. "Why?" "To punish me. Because my grandmother held on to that land through recessions, tax disputes, bad offers, and men who thought she was too old to understand value. I will not be the generation that gives it away because you are uncomfortable. For a moment, something changed in Grant's expression. It was not remorse, not yet, but recognition brushed across his face like a shadow. He remembered Margaret Harper. Emily could see it. He had met her twice before she died, had charmed her over coffee, had called her a tough old bird afterward, as if respect and condescension were the same thing. You never told me, he said. I did not know. Neither did I. Not then. Then how was I supposed to know? Emily let the silence sit there long enough for him to hear himself. By doing what every responsible developer is supposed to do before building a mansion and financing a project. Read the record. Verify the title. Ask the question before pouring concrete. He looked away, and she knew the point had landed because he did not immediately defend himself. Outside the tall windows, twilight had settled over the lawn. The guest shapes moved beyond the glass, muted and elegant, drifting toward cars that would carry Grant's problem into the private conversations of people who controlled money. What exactly do you want me to say publicly? He asked at last. Emily opened the folder and removed a second page. Eleanor drafted a statement. It says that Whitmore Development has received updated title confirmation regarding parcel WR-17, that the Harper Family Land Trust retains ground rights, that you are entering a lawful lease arrangement, and that prior public comments about my financial standing were inaccurate and unfair. Grant's mouth hardened at the last words. That part is personal. So was mocking my apartment. He ran a hand over his jaw. For years, Emily had watched that gesture precede persuasion, apology, dismissal, whatever mask best fit the moment. But no mask arrived. He simply looked tired, older than he had in the rain outside her building, less like a man who owned the view and more like one who had mistaken altitude for height. Madison will hate this, he said. That is between you and Madison. The board will question my judgment. They should. His eyes returned to hers, sharp with old pride. You really have changed. Emily felt the sentence move through her, searching for a wound and finding scar tissue instead. Once, she would have wanted him to understand how expensive that change had been, how many nights she had sat in apartment 3C with unpaid bills and a life that felt too small to survive inside. Now she only nodded. I had to. The door opened softly, and Eleanor stepped in without apology. Mr. Whitmore, your counsel is on the phone. He would like to speak with you immediately. Grant looked at Emily, then at the documents, then at the small glass city of his future sitting on the table. When he finally picked up the statement, his hand was steady, but his voice had lost its command. Leave it, he said. I will review it. Emily closed her folder. No. You will sign an acknowledgement tonight that negotiations begin Monday. The statement can wait until your attorney stops hyperventilating into a billable hour. Eleanor's lips barely moved, but Emily knew she was trying not to smile. Grant looked from one woman to the other and seemed to understand, perhaps for the first time, that the room contained no one left for him to diminish. Outside, a car engine started. Another guest leaving. Another whisper becoming tomorrow's rumor. Emily turned toward the door, not victorious exactly, but upright in a way she had not felt for years. Behind her, Grant's mansion remained bright against the darkening ridge, beautiful, fragile, and newly honest about what held it up. Grant signed the acknowledgement at 9:43 that night in the library, while his attorney spoke through the speakerphone in a voice that kept trying to sound calm and kept failing by half an inch. Eleanor reviewed every line before allowing Emily to touch the pen. Thomas Reed had already left with the registry folder tucked beneath his arm, and most of the guests had drifted away into the clean dark of Whitmore Ridge, carrying the story. With them like a fragile glass, they could not wait to show someone else. Madison did not enter the library again. Through the open door, Emily saw her once near the staircase, speaking sharply into her phone, her cream dress bright beneath the chandelier, her face turned away from Grant as if distance could become a legal strategy. When the last signature was finished, Grant set the pen down with unnecessary care. You have what you wanted, he said. Emily looked at the paper, then at him. No, I have a beginning. He gave a tired laugh, but there was no humor left in it. You always did like moral victories. I liked being treated as if I existed. That silenced him more completely than the documents had. For a moment, the room seemed to fold backward through time. Emily saw him younger, leaning over blueprints at their first apartment, excited and sleep-deprived, calling her Em because he had not yet learned to make her name sound small. She saw herself beside him, barefoot on a kitchen tile floor, calculating permit fees with a pencil while he talked about legacy, as if it were something they would build together. There had been love once, or at least something close enough to wear its clothes. That was the hardest truth to forgive. Not that he had become cruel, but that he had not begun that way. Grant looked toward the model of Ridgeview beneath glass. I did not think you cared about business. Emily breathed in slowly. The room smelled of leather, paper, and the faint expensive cologne that used to mean home before it meant warning. I cared about you. You mistook that for having no ambitions of my own. His eyes moved back to her, and for the first time that evening, he did not look angry. He looked confused by the size of what he had missed. Why did you never fight harder during the divorce? The question was so late, so useless, so human, that Emily almost felt the old ache rise. She held it carefully until it settled. Because every room was full of people who had already decided you were the builder and I was the decoration. I got tired of explaining my own life to men billing $600 an hour not to believe me. Eleanor, standing near the shelves, said nothing, but Emily felt her attention sharpen. Grant lowered his gaze. Outside the windows, the lawn lights cast perfect circles on the grass, each one revealing only what it was designed to reveal. I thought you would be happier away from all this, he said. Emily shook her head. No, you hoped I would be quieter. He flinched at that, not dramatically, just enough. It was a small movement, but Emily saw it because she had once built a marriage out of watching his smallest movements and adjusting herself around them. She no longer adjusted. Eleanor closed her briefcase. We are finished for tonight. My office will send the lease framework Monday morning. Until then, Mr. Whitmore, I strongly advise against further public representations regarding ownership of the land. Grant nodded once, as if nodding cost him something. In the foyer, Claire was waiting by the door with Emily's coat over her arm. Most of the flowers had already begun to look excessive, white orchids arranged as if beauty could distract from structural weakness. Claire searched Emily's face. Are you all right? Emily accepted the coat. Not exactly. Claire nodded. Better than pretending, then. They stepped outside into the cold. The ridge air smelled of wet leaves, cut grass, and distant wood smoke from houses less interested in impressing anyone. Behind them, the mansion glowed like a museum exhibit about confidence. Grant followed them only as far as the doorway. Emily, he said. She turned. For once, he seemed unsure what performance the moment required. The apartment, he said slowly. I should not have said what I said. It was not enough. It was not public. It was not the statement. It did not repair the years. But it was the first true sentence he had offered her without trying to profit from it. Emily held his gaze. No, she said. You should not have. Then she walked down the stone steps with Claire beside her, the leather folder under her arm, and for the first time all evening, the ground beneath her felt entirely her own. By Monday morning, the story had already learned how to travel. It moved through Boston the way certain truths always did among people who claimed to value discretion, softly, elegantly, and with remarkable speed. A lender mentioned it to a partner over breakfast in Back Bay. A city planner received a careful email asking whether the Ridgeview expansion file required supplemental title review. Someone from the Saturday gathering told someone at a charity board meeting that Grant Whitmore's famous mansion might be standing on land tied to his ex-wife's family trust. By noon, the word mistake had become the most generous version of the rumor. Grant's office issued no statement. Madison posted no photographs. The mansion, usually displayed online from every flattering angle, disappeared from her social media as if 12 acres of limestone, glass, and landscaping had suddenly become too shy for public life. Emily watched none of it unfold directly. She went to work on Monday as usual, walking the 4 blocks to the small nonprofit housing office where she handled intake paperwork 3 days a week, a job Grant had once described as noble in the tone people used when they meant insignificant. The office occupied the 2nd floor above a dental clinic in Cambridge, with old carpet, humming fluorescent lights, and a coffee machine that produced something legally adjacent to coffee. Emily liked it anyway. The women who came through those doors did not need chandeliers. They needed leases explained, forms completed, safe addresses, bus routes, and someone to tell them that starting over did not make them failures. Around 11, Eleanor called. His counsel requested expedited negotiation. Emily stepped into the hallway, where a bulletin board advertised free tax, help, and a support group at the public library. How expedited? This afternoon, if possible. The bank. Breathing down his neck, I imagine. Politely, because banks are just panic in a better suit. Emily looked through the glass window into the office. A young mother sat at her desk, bouncing a toddler on her knee while trying to read a rental application. The toddler was holding a purple crayon like a tiny sword against bureaucracy. Emily smiled despite herself. Tell them tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. Your office. That gives him time to think. Good. Thinking will be new for him. Eleanor made a sound that might have been approval if attorneys admitted to such human weaknesses. The next morning, Grant arrived at Price, Alden and Rowe with his attorney, a man named Peter Caldwell who wore rimless glasses and the tight expression of someone paid very well to clean up messes created by confidence. Grant looked immaculate, as always, but the polish no longer concealed the strain. His navy suit fit perfectly. His face did not. Emily sat across the conference table with Eleanor beside her, the Harper Trust documents stacked neatly in front of them. No flowers, no music, no guests, no Madison. Just paper, law, and the kind of quiet that did not flatter anyone. Peter Caldwell began with market value, comparable land leases, appraisal timelines, title insurance language, and potential remedies. His voice was smooth, practiced, respectful. Grant said little. Emily listened. There had been a time when rooms like this made her feel smaller with every minute, as if the darkwood table and legal pads and expensive pens existed to remind her that she was a visitor in decisions affecting her own life. But now she understood something she wished she had learned earlier. Authority was not always loud. Sometimes it was a woman with a folder who had read every page. Ms. Harper, Peter said at last, my client is prepared to offer a purchase price substantially above appraised land value. Grant looked at her then, as if money might still know the way back to command. It would simplify everything, he said. Emily folded her hands. For you. His mouth tightened. For everyone. No, she said. Not for everyone. Eleanor slid the draft lease across the table. The trust is not selling. We are prepared to discuss a 99-year ground lease at fair market value, annual adjustment terms, compliance disclosures, and immediate correction of the collateral filings. Peter scanned the first page. Grant's eyes stayed on Emily. And the statement? He asked. Emily reached into her folder and placed it before him. The words were short, factual, and impossible to decorate. He would acknowledge the title clarification. He would acknowledge that his prior comments about Emily's financial position and living situation were unfair. He would confirm the first year of lease payments would fund transitional housing support for women rebuilding after divorce. Grant read it once, then again. You are really going to make this public? Emily thought of her apartment lobby, the rain on his coat, Madison asking if that was where she lived, the little laugh that had followed her up 3 flights of stairs. No, she said. You made the disrespect public. I am making the correction public. The room settled around that sentence. Even Peter Caldwell stopped moving his pen. Grant looked down at the paper, and for once, he did not argue immediately. Outside the conference room windows, Boston carried on beneath a pale morning sky, indifferent and busy, as cities always were when private kingdoms began turning into paperwork. Grant did not sign the final documents that morning. Men like Grant rarely surrendered in one clean motion. They preferred to circle the inevitable 3 or 4 times, as if dignity might be hiding behind a clause. Peter Caldwell requested 48 hours for review, which Eleanor granted with the expression of a woman allowing a child to finish pretending the vegetables were optional. Emily returned to Cambridge afterward and spent the rest of the day helping a woman named Denise understand a lease renewal that had been written as if ordinary tenants were expected to decode ancient prophecy before keeping a roof overhead. That evening, back in apartment 3C, Emily reheated soup on the stove and watched rain gather again on the kitchen window. The old building groaned around her, pipes knocking, floorboards settling, a neighbor's television murmuring through the wall. For years, those sounds had embarrassed her when she imagined Grant's world of silent elevators and climate-controlled rooms. Now they felt almost tender. They were proof of people living, not performing. On Wednesday afternoon, Eleanor called while Emily was sorting donated winter coats at the nonprofit office. "He signed," she said. Emily lowered a wool coat into a cardboard box and closed her eyes. All of it. The lease framework, the collateral correction authorization, the repayment agreement, and the public statement. The first year of ground lease payments will be directed into the Transitional Housing Fund within 10 business days. Emily leaned against the supply room shelf. The coats smelled of cedar, laundry soap, and second chances. "How much?" Eleanor named the amount, and for a moment Emily could not speak. It was more money than she had ever seen connected to her name, without someone else explaining why she did not deserve it. "Emily," Eleanor said gently, "are you still there?" "Yes." Her voice came out thin. "I am here. There is one more thing. Grant asked whether you would consider meeting him before the statement goes live." Emily opened her eyes. Through the supply room doorway, she could see Denise laughing softly as her toddler tried to zip himself into a coat 2 sizes too big. "No," Emily said. "Not before." Eleanor paused, then said, "Good." The statement appeared at 4 o'clock on Whitmore Development's website and was sent to investors, lenders, and local partners. It was not dramatic. It did not confess every wound. It did not mention Madison's smile or the rain outside the old apartment or the years Emily spent being edited out of Grant's story. But it said enough. It confirmed the Harper Family Land Trust's ground rights. It confirmed the lease arrangement. It corrected prior assumptions about ownership. And near the end, in plain language no attorney could fully sterilize, it stated that Grant Whitmore's past public comments regarding Emily Harper's financial standing and residence had been inaccurate, unfair, and personally regretted. Claire called 5 minutes later. "I just read it." Emily sat at her kitchen table with the laptop open in front of her. "So did I. How do you feel?" Emily looked around the small apartment, at the chipped bowl, the yellow lamp, the photograph of Margaret Harper, the stack of envelopes she no longer feared opening. "Strange," she said. "Like I expected it to make noise." Claire was quiet for a second. "Justice is disappointing that way. No orchestra, no lightning, just paperwork and a weird feeling in your chest." Emily laughed then, unexpectedly, and the sound startled her with its lightness. Across town, the internet would do what the internet always did, feed on someone's polished downfall until the next polished downfall wandered into traffic wearing better shoes. Investors would calculate. Madison would adapt or leave. Grant would survive, because men like him usually did, though perhaps with fewer speeches about legacy for a while. But in apartment 3C, something had ended without applause. Emily opened the Harper Trust folder and placed the signed lease copy inside. Then she took out her grandmother's photograph, wiped a trace of dust from the glass, and set it closer to the lamp. "You were right," she whispered to the woman in work boots who had known old things remembered. The next morning, Emily walked to the nonprofit office with a cashier's check request in her bag and a plan forming quietly in her mind. The first payment would not become a monument. It would become security deposits, emergency rent, legal consultations, moving trucks, clean sheets, bus passes, and locks changed before sunset. It would become doors. Not grand doors beneath chandeliers. Real doors. Doors women could close behind them while learning to breathe again. 3 weeks later, the first door opened because of the Harper Fund. It was not dramatic. There were no cameras, no speeches, no ribbons stretched across a polished lobby. Before gratitude could become uncomfortable. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for a moment and let the quiet settle inside her. This, she thought, was what repayment was supposed to feel like. Not triumph over Grant. Not gossip traveling through Boston in expensive shoes. Not Madison deleting photographs from her social media. This, a woman closing a safe door behind her child. By winter, the fund had helped 7 women with deposits, legal consultations, emergency rent, and storage fees. Eleanor joined the advisory board after claiming she was far too busy, which meant she attended every meeting with color-coded notes and terrified 2 landlords into behaving like decent citizens. Claire volunteered on Saturdays and brought muffins from a bakery near her office, because apparently even justice worked better with carbohydrates. Emily kept her job at the nonprofit and kept living in apartment 3C, despite 3 different people suggesting she could afford something nicer now. Nicer had become a suspicious word to her. The old building still complained in the cold. The radiator still hissed like an irritated cat. Mrs. Alvarez still cleaned the lobby on Sundays while muttering about people who left mail on the floor. Emily loved it with a loyalty that surprised her. Out of arrogance, could sometimes recognize the shape of what they had broken. Spring came slowly to Brookline, first in dirty snowbanks shrinking along the curbs, then in crocuses pushing through hard soil beside the apartment steps. On the first warm Saturday, Emily walked to Whitmore Ridge alone. The mansion was still there, bright and enormous behind its gates, though the brass plaque near the access road had changed. Harper Family Land Trust, ground lessor. The words were small, tasteful, nearly invisible unless someone bothered to look. Emily stood at the edge of the road for a while, listening to the wind move through the bare branches. She did not feel like the owner of a mansion. She felt like the keeper of a story that had finally been told correctly. Grant had thought the old apartment proved she had nothing. The world had believed him because the world loved shiny evidence and ignored quiet records. But Emily had learned that a life did not become small because someone mocked its walls. A woman did not become poor because she chose peace over performance. And dignity, real dignity, was not the house on the hill or the view from its windows. It was knowing where you stood, knowing what you owned, and never again letting someone else explain your worth while standing on ground that had always remembered your name. The Harper Fund did not become famous, which was exactly how Emily wanted it. Fame had a way of turning help into performance, and she had seen enough performance to last several lifetimes. Instead, the fund became practical. It paid a locksmith in Quincy before a woman named Marcia returned from court. It covered 3 nights in a clean motel for a grandmother and her 2 grandchildren when a promised apartment failed inspection. It paid for a used laptop so a woman could finish her online medical billing course after leaving a marriage where every password had been treated like shared property except the ones that mattered. Each check felt small compared with the scale of Grant's old world, but small things had saved Emily more than once. A working radiator, a friend who answered at midnight, a legal document pulled from a forgotten file, a key that turned. By late May, apartment 3C smelled of open windows and lilacs from the bush near the alley. Emily had taken to leaving the kitchen window cracked while she worked at the table, reviewing fund applications beside the Harper Trust ledger. The old apartment had not become grander, but it had become fuller. A new bookshelf stood where a stack of cardboard boxes once leaned. Margaret's photograph had been reframed in dark walnut. On the sill, a basil plant leaned toward the light with blind, stubborn optimism. One afternoon, Eleanor came by carrying a bakery box and a folder because apparently attorneys expressed affection through pastry and documents. She set both on the table and looked around the apartment with quiet approval. "This place suits you," she said. Emily poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. Grant once thought that was an insult. Grant once pledged land he did not own. His judgment has had public limitations. Emily laughed, and the sound no longer surprised her. Eleanor opened the folder. Inside was a proposal from a small community development group interested in renovating 2 vacant units in Emily's building for transitional tenants. The landlord, who had ignored repairs for years with the spiritual commitment of a medieval gatekeeper, had become suddenly cooperative after learning that Emily's name was attached to both a trust and an attorney who could make silence expensive. 2 units to start, Eleanor said. Reasonable budget. Strong oversight. No naming plaque unless you want one. Emily looked toward the hallway, where the stairs creaked under someone's groceries. She imagined 2 doors cleaned, painted, repaired, waiting for women who had been told, directly or quietly, that they had nowhere better to go. The idea moved through her with a tenderness so sharp it almost hurt. "No plaque," she said. "Just make sure the locks work." That evening, after Eleanor left, Emily walked through the building slowly. Mrs. Alvarez was watering a plant on the second-floor landing. Mr. Donnelly from 4A was trying to convince the mail carrier that the Red Sox only lost because modern players lacked patience, which seemed unfair to baseball and possibly to patience.